So good to see every one of you here on spring break weekend. And man, my heart is just so full of gratitude this morning on so many different levels. We just came back from a week of serving down in Tennessee at a ministry that we love and support for ministers and missionaries, where we're investing in others, and it was very meaningful. And so I'm thankful for that opportunity. I'm thankful to be able to have shared that with my wife. I'm thankful for a church that believes in investing in others and makes that time available to us. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to be back home. I missed you guys last Sunday, but I was also thankful last week for guys like John and Dustin who make it possible for somebody like Eric Cooper, who preached here last Sunday, to be online Sunday afternoon. So Sunday afternoon, I was watching the service from here and able to see what was going on. So that's a blessing that we have. And so thankful today, man, Mike and Stephanie Greathouse are here and several members of the family, rejoicing with them in the progress that Lauren has made the last couple of days. Their daughter has been hospitalized now for about 38 days with leukemia, and she's in her late 20s, and the last couple of days the blood counts are starting to move in a positive direction, and so we rejoice in that and thank God, and just ask that you would continue to remember Lauren in your prayers. But so thankful. So just a lot of things that you just want to stop and say thank God for what He's doing, for what He's done, for what He's going to do. And I'm really excited about what He's going to do. I believe in this service as He intersects our lives right where we live. Wherever you are, whatever's going on in your life today, I believe God has brought us together like this on a weekend like this, and when we come into His presence, our lives are changed. As we encounter His truth, it is transformational. And I believe that He's going to do a work in us and through us today, and so I pray that'll be the case. We go constantly to Jesus Christ as our example on how to live. We look at what He said, we look at what He did, and there's no question about it. In this series that we've been talking about love, Jesus Christ was the most loving person that ever walked on the face of the earth. He was loving in what He said. He was loving in what He did. Unlike us, He always knew exactly the right thing to say and the right thing to do. And you'll find it interesting that as you study His life, there are occasions where Jesus avoided conflict. There are occasions where Jesus resolved conflict. And there are also times where Jesus actually created conflict. All of those possibilities will be present in our lives at various times depending on the circumstances. Sometimes, even as you're Spirit-led, there'll be times where God may call upon you to avoid a conflict. It's just the wise thing to do in the circumstances. There may be other occasions where you'll need to resolve conflict. And there may, in fact, be opportunities where you're going to create some conflict. Most people seem to think that keeping the peace means avoiding confrontation at all costs, but that's not the case. You know, sometimes they just kind of, hey, I'm going to swallow my hurts, hide my feelings, repress the truth, ignore the problems, and pretend that everything's okay. Maybe it'll all go away. That's the mode of operation in a lot of families, a lot of marriages these days. Just avoidance at all costs. Avoidance, though, causes a lot of problems. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 10 in the Message says, an evasive eye, one that's just going to look away, is a sign of trouble ahead, but an open face-to-face meeting results in peace. In theory, I think everybody in this room would say, I believe honesty is the best policy. That sounds right. I believe we would all be in agreement with that. But sometimes in practice, we act like honesty, maybe it's not such a good idea after all. Maybe there's an issue that you need to confront in love today, but you've been reluctant to do it up till now. I just want to invite you to be open to the Spirit's prompting in your life, because God may say something to you today that is going to have some very, very specific application in your life, even as you leave this room today. I just say, be open. Sometimes that's hard to do, though, because I can hear somebody saying, you know what, if I told my father the truth about how I really feel, he would never speak to me again. I could see somebody else saying, if I told my husband how I truly feel about our marriage, he'd blow up. That's how you feel, and you may be very right in that feeling. That doesn't change what needs to happen. Somebody might say, if I told my boyfriend what I believe about his behavior or what I don't like about his behavior, he'd break up with me. Or maybe you'd say, if I talk to my boss about what we're doing at work and how it's unethical, I'd get fired. We're in this series called Love Does, and what love does sometimes is not easy. Sometimes it's not easy. In fact, sometimes what love does, it's downright difficult. Because, see, love takes courage, and sometimes love involves confrontation. And in some ways, we've been exploring the lighter sides of love, but I would say today we're kind of moving to graduate level loving. We're going to talk about some things today that are tough. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. We've been in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and talking about what love is and now what love does. And here's what love does. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. I believe every one of us would understand that. We would admit that. I want to take that passage from 1 Corinthians 13:6 and couple it with another passage that Paul wrote over in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. He says, we will speak the truth in love. We want to get to the truth. We want to do so in love. And so we're going to talk about this skill that almost nobody says they're good at. It's a skill that few people teach. And to be honest, most don't even want to learn. And you're going to say, well, then what am I doing here? Nobody shows us how to do this effectively. Nobody teaches us how to confront someone in love. And so the truth is, in order to have a better relationship sometimes, in order to help somebody you care about, you'll have to say some tough things. Maybe some things that somebody doesn't want to hear. And so how do you tell them what they need to hear? Maybe don't want to hear, but need to hear. How do you do that in love? Well, the Apostle Paul is a great example of this. He gives us some wonderful teaching, and he actually models for us what this looks like and what this means and how it can happen in your life and mine. He wrote a couple of letters to a church in Corinth, and Corinth was a city in Greece, and Paul had started a church there, and then he had moved on, and even though he was not physically present, though, he still kept in touch. He still communicated and interacted and corresponded with the Corinthians who were really messed up. And that's an understatement. They were really messed up. There were some issues that had to be addressed. Paul was the one to address them. And he did such an amazing job of addressing those issues, these problems that needed to be spoken to. And so Paul, the way he did it is he steps up and he writes two letters, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Those are two letters written by Paul to the church in Corinth. And in those letters, if you've ever read them, you know that there were some very tough things that Paul had to say. Almost every chapter is dealing with one problem and then the next and the next and the next. And he had to deal with just one issue after another, but he did so in brutal honesty, and yet he always spoke the truth in love. And I would suggest to you today that he provides for us an amazing example of how to do just exactly that, speaking the truth, but speaking the truth in love. And so we're going to learn some keys today from Paul, because when there's a confrontation that may be needed, this is how it's done. Number one, before you confront, you need to check your motivation. Check your motive. What is it that motivates you toward this confrontation? Why do you feel like you need to talk to this person about the issue? There's all kinds of improper motives, and it could be jealousy or personal irritation or frustration, I can say this, frustration, envy, jealousy, a desire to get even. You could just go right down the list of all these different possible reasons that would be improper motivations for why to confront somebody. There are a lot of good motivations as well. Trying to help somebody out, trying to improve a relationship, trying to obey God. Maybe God has spoken to you about something that needs to be said to somebody else, and that would be a reasonable and a right motivation for confrontation. Now, I know what happens in this regard. Sometimes people say, man, who am I to speak the truth and love to somebody? Who am I? I don't have it all together. I don't have all the answers. And so our tendency might be to kind of shrink away from the possibility and, what do I have to offer? I've got all my own issues. How could I say anything that's going to matter for somebody else? I'm not perfect. I hear that from people all the time. Hey, if we wait for perfect people to do ministry, we're dead in the water, folks. We're not going to get anything done around here. We're just going to sit around in an empty room and look at each other. The imperfect people need not apply. I mean, this is for all of us to think about as we think about honoring and obeying God and His Word and doing what He says. So what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to decide, do I really have to be perfect to speak the truth in love? The answer is no, of course not. This is about love, though. It's about caring about others. It's about improving relationships. And so the issue is make sure that your motivation is proper. I'll give you a little example. Paul, he had just laid it on the Corinthians. That's the best way to say it. He just laid it on them. He was brutally honest with them about some things that needed to be changed. Okay? Now look what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 19. He said, everything we do, dear friends, it is to strengthen you. You talk about the right motivation, right there it is. Hey guys, we're trying to help you out. We want to strengthen you. We want to make you better. Paul didn't get a kick out of confronting the Corinthians. It was not something he enjoyed, but he loved them enough to do the difficult thing. And because of his love, there were some things that needed to be said, and to not say them would be detrimental to them on a spiritual level, which is anything but loving. Take a look at Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. It says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Wounds from a friend. See, this is foundational. When you love somebody, your motivation is pure and you're going to speak the truth in love. It may wound them at first. It may create hurt or pain, but it's the right thing to do because mature Christians learn how to lovingly confront the difficult issues that need to be addressed. You'll know you're doing it for the right reason when it's for their benefit and not your own. See, mature Christians, they're willing to address these tough issues and ask, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for the right reason? Am I doing it for them, or am I somehow doing this for me? If you're getting something off your chest, if it's just about making you feel better, then you might need to reconsider. Check your motivation. That's step one if you want to follow Paul's example in confrontation. Secondly, before you confront, plan your presentation. Before you confront, plan your presentation. This is about thinking through and praying through what you're going to say even before you say it. I love Proverbs chapter 16, verse 23. A wise man's heart guides his mouth, and his lips promote instruction. Wise people think before they speak. That's what we learn there in Proverbs. Paul did this when he had some painful truths to present to his friends in Corinth. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4. He said, I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart with many tears. Look at that. You know, there's a lot of emotion in that verse and packed into what Paul had to say. Great distress, anguish of heart, many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love for you. Paul had some tough things to say, but he was not impulsive. It's not like he just sat down one day and fired off an email to some people to get some stuff off his chest because they'd made him mad or he was upset in some way. That's not what this is about. He sat down and he thought about what needed to be said. He agonized over it. He wept over it. That's how much he cared for these Corinthian Christians. See, sometimes a loving confrontation is necessary with the people you love, the people I love, your husband or your wife, maybe your kids, a brother or sister, a parent, a neighbor, a coworker. It could be any number of people, and sometimes a loving confrontation is necessary. And when that is the case, you begin by planning what you'll say. I'm going to just plan out what I need to say. I'm going to think this through. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to process it, maybe shed a few tears over it ahead of time, but I'm going to plan what to say. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11 says, the right word at the right time is like a custom-made piece of jewelry. So we're going to pray for wisdom and ask for God to guide us in this important process. The right word at the right time. Pray about what you're going to say. Secondly, plan when you'll say it. Plan when you'll say it. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 12 speaks to this. A wise friend's timely reprimand is like a gold ring slipped on your finger. See, timing is critical. And it's not wise to bring up a tough topic when the person you need to speak to is tired or in a hurry or under pressure. I mean, these are bad times to bring up something tough. You may say, I'm ready to deal with it, but they're not ready to hear it. So be sensitized to that because timing is crucial. Plan when you'll say it. Third thing, plan how you'll say it. Plan how you'll say it. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 in the Message. Rash language cuts and maims, but there is healing in the words of the wise. See, folks, there's a right way to say the right thing, and there's a wrong way to say the right thing. We've probably all done that. But we want to make sure we say the right thing in the right way. Plan how you'll say it. This is not to say that what you tell them won't hurt, but we can say the tough things in love and with God's help in a way that promotes healing and hope. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 21. And by the way, all of these verses are at the footnote section of your worship folder for you to research a little further on your own. Verse 21, the wise in heart are called discerning, and pleasant words promote instruction. Before you confront, plan your presentation. Next, when you confront, and this is so critical, say it lovingly. Say it lovingly. Aren't loving words easier to hear than critical and condemning words? Paul told the Corinthians the truth, and I'm sure those truths were tough to hear. Even though he spoke the truth, though, he spoke it in love. See, what we have to be careful of in the church and as Christians, we have to be careful that we don't take truth and use it like a club to beat people over the head with. I saw a picture one time, and it was about the sanctity of life, and it had a cartoon illustration of a Christian with their Bible crashing down on somebody's head. That's not the way we want to approach love at all. We want to make sure that we are careful about our motivation, as I've already said. And you may say, well, I feel better getting this off my chest. The objective is not to get something off your chest. It is not to make you feel better. If either of those are the options, then let's be honest, your concern is for your benefit, not that other person. Because if you feel good saying what has to be said, that may be a good sign that you're saying it for your own benefit. Say what needs to be said for the benefit of others. Sometimes that's going to be hard to say. There will be anguish, there will be pain, there will be hurt, there will be tears behind those words, but you can say it in love. And as I said previously, in previous weeks of this series, so many of the characteristics and quality of love are intertwined. I mean, it's hard to separate one or the other. We've been talking about what love is and what love does, but I mean, it's this tangled up thing, which is a good thing. But when you really stop and think about it, love does truth. There's no question about that. But it does it in kindness and humility and compassion and with patience and all these other qualities that we've been speaking of. So it's all kind of intertwined together. There's a little equation that I want to give you, and this is not original. I don't know who to credit it to or where I found it, but it says truth plus tact plus timing equals transformation. You speak the truth, do it in a tactful, loving way at the right time as God directs, and that leads to transformation. That leads to life change, and that's a very, very positive thing. But we have to see the whole. Again, the truth has to be spoken in love for transformation to take place. Paul said to these Corinthians, he said, I'm writing these things not to shame you, but to warn you as my beloved children. And he gave them just more than just truth. He gave them truth coupled with tact and timing. He had compassion. He had some things to say, and these were things they needed to hear. These are things he was saying for their own good. It's kind of like what parents have said sometimes to their kids. This is going to hurt me worse than it hurts you. We're telling them the truth that they need to hear, as difficult as that may be, but we're doing it in a loving way. As I was thinking about it this week, I was thinking Paul could have made it easy on himself and just kept his mouth shut. I mean, he could have remained silent. That would have been easier. That would have been more convenient. They probably didn't want to hear what he had to say anyway, but how can avoiding the truth be considered loving? It can't. He needed to speak the truth. And that leads me to the next point. When you confront, you need to be careful to provide affirmation. That's a loving thing to do. Provide affirmation. This is a very important part of speaking the truth in love. See, we're confronting in truth, but we're affirming in love. If you want to have a healthy relationship, if you want to have a healthy marriage or anything else, you need truth and love. You need the two together in a healthy relationship. And the Bible says that the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. But it might make you miserable at first. You ever had that happen? I mean, I've had some things said to me that were the truth, but they were painful to hear. They were difficult to hear, very emotional. Sometimes, a surgeon has to inflict some pain before healing can begin. Even though we confront in truth, affirmation and encouragement can do wonders in bringing the healing in a relationship. And one of the ways to affirm is to begin and end the conversation on a positive note. Paul did this in his books. He begins on a positive note. Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he begins his letter by saying, hey, I always thank God for you. It's a great positive, affirming thing. I always thank God for you. Then at the end of the book, he says, my love to all of you in Christ Jesus. Man, that's a loving and affirming thing to say. But in between those affirming words, he deals with some very tough issues, as I've said, from one end to the other. Even in the middle, though, he sticks in this verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 4. He says, I have great confidence in you. I take great pride in you. I am greatly encouraged in all our troubles. My joy knows no bounds. It's the loving thing to do. Point out what's really good and then acknowledge those things that are not so good that need to be worked on to get better. See, the good news is that speaking the truth in love and receiving the truth, these are skills that you can learn with practice. Most of us probably aren't good at this just on the front end. We need to learn it and we need to grow and get better. We all can get better at it. But I want to give you a reality check, and this is the hard part. The reality check is when you confront, you risk rejection. And maybe this is where you bailed out in the past. Maybe you've done this and it didn't work out like you'd hoped, and because of it, you haven't gone there again. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 and 9. Paul said, I know I distressed you greatly with my letter. That says a lot, doesn't it? Although I felt awful at the time, see, this brings in his emotions. I don't feel at all bad now that I see how it turned out. The letter upsets you, but only for a while. And then verse 9, he goes on to say, I'm glad, not that you were upset, but that you were jarred into turning things around. You let the distress bring you to God, not drive you from Him. See, they were upset. Paul's loving confrontation, it jarred them into reality. It was a wake-up call. It can be scary to speak the truth in love. The reason why we stuff our emotions and hide our feelings and avoid speaking the truth is because we fear the possible consequences. We don't know how that other person's going to respond, but that's not our responsibility. I am not responsible for how they respond. Don't allow fear to keep you from speaking the truth in love, especially if you feel like it's something God's leading you to do. Because when that happens, fear is greater than love. And love, think about it, love should always be greater than fear. Always. We've sung about that today. But it's a scary thing to do, to speak the truth in love to somebody. See, we don't know how they're going to react. If I come and speak the truth in love to you, you may get mad. You may walk out. You may turn your back. You may slam the door. You may sever the relationship. You may retaliate. It can go so many different ways. You don't know what's going to happen, so you're scared. It's a scary thing. You're afraid and you're taking a great risk. But isn't it better to risk than settle for superficial, shallow relationships? See, when your love runs deep, you'll be willing to risk rejection because the potential reward is greater than the risk. The potential reward is greater than the risk. And by not speaking the truth in love, you may be killing the relationship anyway. It's dying before your eyes, and nobody wants to admit it. We teach toward application around here because we believe just a bunch of information with no application makes you a Bible snob. We want you to take the truth and let it make a difference in the way you live when you walk out the doors Monday through Saturday. This is not a Sunday-only kind of thing. And so in the way of application, I want to ask you a question and ask you to consider it personally. Is there someone I need to speak to in love? Is there someone I need to speak to in love today? I don't know what the answer is for you, but who do you have to have an honest conversation with? Who do you need to speak the truth to in love? Do you have a friend, maybe a teenage friend that's going down the wrong path and nobody said anything, and God may lay it on your heart to step up and speak the truth in love to them? Nobody else is going to say anything to your friend. Will you talk to them about whatever it is the Lord has laid on your heart? Do you care enough to speak the truth in love? Because that's really what this is all about. Do you have a friend who's pretending there isn't a problem in your relationship and somebody just needs to speak to it? I mean, is there something they're pretending not to know or you're pretending not to know? What's the elephant in the room? Everybody sees it and knows it's there, but nobody ever says anything about it. What excuse have you been using for putting off bringing up that issue that needs to be dealt with? And this has been going through my mind. I can hear people say, Steve, I don't want to make things worse. I just don't want to rock the boat. Sometimes being quiet is what makes it worse because it just kind of festers. Folks, if there's cancer in your relationship, not talking about it doesn't make it go away. It may be kind of subdued for a while, but it'll resurrect again. And sometimes in a more drastic and devastating force than ever before. This is not about even being judgmental. Sometimes I think people check out saying, well, I don't want to be judgmental, or, this is what love does. We're talking about some stuff where we're wading out into the deep water. You say, hey, I don't know what to say. I don't know all the answers. I'm not perfect, as I said earlier. You don't have to know the answer. Maybe what God wants to do in your life is use you to point out the problem and then point them to Him. Maybe that's your role. Not to have the answer, or to have all the answers, or to be perfect. See, the good news is God has not called you or me to solve their problem. That's not your job. He may want to use you to point out the problem and then point them to Him. Maybe that's what He's calling you to. Are you willing to do it? Do you care enough to speak up? The bottom line on all this is sometimes what love does, sometimes love demands that you say something. Sometimes love demands that you say, hey, what you're doing isn't working. Sometimes love does this. It says, stop. Sometimes love says, listen to me. Sometimes love says, hey, I love you too much to be quiet. Will you care enough to confront? I realize that what I'm talking about is something that requires a huge level of emotional and spiritual maturity. There's no question about that. And in so many ways, it's countercultural. Our culture basically says, hey, let everybody do what they want to do. Don't worry about it. It's no skin off my back. If they want to mess up their lives, if they want to destroy their marriage, it's their life. It's none of my business. Is that love? I mean, really, is that love? Hey, you're about to drive your marriage off of a cliff. It's your business. That's none of my business. I say I love you. Go ahead, drive your marriage off the cliff. I'm going to look the other way. But I love you. Really? The real issue is, are you willing to be used by God? Will you be available to be used by Him? Because I am convinced of this, folks, as we talk about what love does. Real friends speak the truth in love. They tell their friends what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. They tell them the truth in love. I want to pray with you about this, and then I want to talk to you about something very important before you go. Would you bow with me, please? Father, I believe that your Spirit has spoken today. And I know what we've talked about can be scary. I have no doubt there are people in this room right now that are feeling a knot in their stomach, a lump in their throat, their palms are sweaty, their heart's racing a little bit as they are thinking about a specific person and a specific topic a specific conversation that needs to be had. It's not going to be easy. But even though speaking the truth can be scary, sometimes it just needs to be done. Would you give us the courage to have the talk that we need to have? Give us the wisdom, Lord, to be able to step back and examine our own motives, and most of all, to allow you to examine our hearts to make sure the motivation is proper. Help us to find the right words to say. Help us to be able to say those right words in the right time, in the right way. And help us do what needs to be done in a positive way. Speak the truth in love and give affirmation. It's going to take courage, but give us the courage to be willing to risk rejection in an attempt to save and improve the relationship. This is one of the most difficult expressions of genuine love that we've talked about thus far. I pray, Lord, that you would guide us, that you would use us, that you would have your way. In Jesus' name, amen.